ladies and gentlemen, sometimes we don't realize what we had until we've walked too far from it. We tell ourselves it didn't matter. We call it too much, too fast, too clingy, too emotional. But what we really mean is we weren't ready. We didn't know how to hold the kind of love that shows up early, checks in often, and stands in the gap when the ground feels unsteady. We called it overwhelming when it was just consistent. We said it was suffocating when it was actually committed. And now, from a distance, we miss what we tried to convince ourselves we didn't need. There are some people who carry love like it's their birthright. They walk into the room and offer it without needing to be begged. They stay up late to hear your fears. They notice the way your voice changes when something's wrong. They text back faster than your heart expects. They chase peace in relationships like it's oxygen, and they're not afraid to fight for closeness. But that kind of presence, when you're used to building walls instead of homes, feels dangerous. See, when you've lived most of your life convincing yourself that detachment is strength, intimacy feels like weakness. When you've mistaken self-sufficiency for wholeness, you'll treat every open heart like it's a threat. So you create distance. You test loyalty with silence. You try to make them prove they'll stay even when you won't give them anything to hold on to. You push and push, hoping they'll pull harder, but they eventually stop. You realize you were never really pushing them away. You were pushing yourself into loneliness. We don't always know what to do with real love when we meet it too early on our healing journey. It feels like being given the keys to a kingdom we don't feel worthy of entering. So we fumble. We act like we're fine being alone. We throw up old defense mechanisms like it's armor, but what we're really doing is protecting our fears. Fear that we'll mess it up. Fear that they'll see the cracks. Fear that once they see the real us, they'll do what others did, leave. So we beat them to it. And then we find ourselves haunted, not by their presence, but by their absence. It's not that they're unforgettable because of what they did. It's that they loved in a way we didn't know we needed. They weren't perfect, but they were present. They weren't always right, but they were always available. And presence, when it's pure, is the one thing you can't fake or force. You either offer it or you don't. And they did until we made them feel like their presence was a problem. Now I know what it feels like to pretend you're unbothered. I know how to smile like silence doesn't sting. I've posted the pictures, curated the captions, walked around like peace was mine when chaos was truing at my soul. But the truth is, you don't miss the person, you miss the mirror. They held up to the parts of you that were still aching to be seen. You miss the way they challenged your silence, the way they reached for you even when you pulled away, the way they stood still when your world felt like a hurricane. Choose to mock what you don't understand. It's easy to label someone's longing for connection as weakness when you've never known the safety of being emotionally held. But love is not weakness. Vulnerability is not weakness. Seeking connection is not weakness. It's brave, it's bold, and when you reject that bravery, it doesn't disappear, it lingers. You remember it when you're lying in bed replaying the moments you dismissed them. You feel it when you hear songs you once shared. You notice it when the quiet hits harder than usual and you realize your peace came in their presence. We tell ourselves we were justified, that we needed space, that they were too intense, but the truth we don't say aloud is this: they triggered a healing we weren't ready to face. They loved with a depth that pulled at wounds we thought we had buried, and instead of healing through it, we ran from it. Not because they were wrong, but because we weren't ready to let someone see that closely. But don't confuse readiness with worthiness. Just because you weren't ready doesn't mean you didn't deserve them. And just because they're no longer there doesn't mean you're cursed. You are still becoming. You are still learning. There is still grace. Sometimes missing them isn't about wanting them back. It's about wanting to become the kind of person who could have received them properly. It's about maturity, accountability, reflection. And yes, it hurts when what we rejected becomes the standard by which we now measure connection. When we realize that the love we couldn't handle is the love we now crave. But that pain isn't punishment, it's instruction. It's calling you higher. It's asking you to grow, to stop running from the hands that want to hold you, to stop punishing the present for what the past taught you, to stop confusing solitude with healing. The ones who love deeply, who ask for reassurance, who reach for you in the middle of chaos, who want to talk things through instead of shutting down, those people are not needy. They are necessary because they remind us that emotional availability is not a luxury. It's a necessity. They remind us that love isn't something to be rationed. It's something to be risked. And maybe the one you let go was simply ahead of your healing. Maybe they weren't too much. Maybe they were just what you needed too early. So yes, you missed them, not because you didn't have your reasons, but because in their own imperfect way they tried. They leaned in. They saw you. They reminded you that love doesn't have to be earned. It can be given. And now you're realizing that what you thought was chaos was actually care. That what you called clingy was actually commitment. That what you deemed too much was just someone refusing to love you halfway. And now you want that, not just from others, but from yourself. You want to be brave enough to love without fear, to stay instead of sabotage, to open up instead of shut down. Because love, real love, isn't afraid of closeness. It doesn't hide behind ego or pride. It shows up again and again. And next time, so will you. Not because you're desperate, but because you're ready. Ready to love. Ready to stay, ready to become what you once pushed away. Avoidance is often a defense mechanism, not a reflection of true disinterest. That's something most people misunderstand. When someone seems emotionally distant, cold, or uninterested, the natural assumption is to take it personally. Like your love wasn't enough, your presence wasn't wanted, or your efforts were in vain. But many times the truth runs deeper. That pulling away, that wall, that silence, it's not about you. It's about a heart that's been trained to survive by retreating. It's about someone who's learned that the safest way to exist is to keep everyone at arm's length. People don't always avoid because they don't care. Sometimes they avoid because they care too much, and caring terrifies them. They fear being seen too clearly. They fear needing someone. They fear the vulnerability that comes with real intimacy. So they put space between themselves and the very thing they want. They reject love not because it's wrong, but because it feels too right, too exposing, too revealing, too risky. And that's what defense mechanisms do. They offer short-term safety in exchange for long-term connection. You know, when someone grows up in an environment where emotions weren't nurtured, where closeness brought pain, or where trust was broken, avoidance becomes second nature. It feels easier to pull away before someone can leave. It feels safer to stay detached than to risk getting hurt. So they develop a style of survival that looks like indifference, but underneath the surface is a quiet storm of longing. They want love, but not the kind that requires them to be emotionally naked. They want connection, but only if it doesn't ask too much. They crave closeness, but they run the moment it knocks at the door. Avoidant behavior is often deeply misunderstood to outsiders and even to the person being pushed away. It can feel like rejection, But more often than not, it's protection. It's a scarred soul trying to keep from being wounded again. It's the product of past pain where giving too much led to heartbreak or opening up led to betrayal. So they learn to downplay their needs, they minimize emotions, they choose control over closeness, and they tell themselves they're fine alone even when loneliness is echoing inside them. But the hard truth is that avoidance doesn't erase desire, it just buries it. It buries it so deep that even the avoidant person starts believing they're better off without love. Yet something changes when they encounter someone who offers real, consistent, unconditional care. At first, it feels invasive. That care pokes holes in their armor. That consistency brings up emotions they've worked hard to suppress. That presence starts to feel like pressure, not because it's aggressive, but because it demands them to show up in ways they've never had to before. And so they pull back, not because they don't value it, but because they don't know how to receive it. They reject the very thing they need most. And later, often in solitude, they begin to feel the weight of what they pushed away. They realize that what they called too much was actually just unfamiliar. That what they labeled cleaning was really loyal. That what they treated as a threat was actually a safe space waiting to be entered. This is the internal conflict of avoidance, the tension between craving intimacy and fearing it. The deeper the desire, the stronger the resistance. And while avoidance might provide temporary control, it ultimately leads to missed opportunities for connection. That defense mechanism might keep the pain out, but it also keeps love out. It builds walls that become prisons. And eventually, when the heart starts to heal and the fear begins to subside, what's left is the realization that distance never really protected them. It just delayed the inevitable longing. So no, it's not always disinterest. It's not always cold-heartedness. Many times, it's the wounded soul doing what it knows best, protecting itself, even if it means losing something beautiful. Consistent love can feel overwhelming to the emotionally unready. When you've spent your life expecting love to be unpredictable, inconsistent, or even conditional, the steady presence of someone who shows up day after day can feel disorienting, not because it's harmful, but because it challenges the way you've been trained to protect your heart. You've built a world where love comes with tension, where attention is earned through performance, where affection is rationed and rare. So when someone enters your life who offers love freely, without games, without manipulation, without waiting for you to deserve it, it shakes something loose inside. You tell yourself it's too much, too frequent, too emotional. You wonder why they want to talk so often, why they check in, why they care about things that feel small to you. But the truth is, it's not the frequency of their love that's overwhelming, it's the unfamiliarity of it. It doesn't fit the emotional blueprint you've built. You're used to waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're prepared for people to leave, to change, to pull away, but they don't. And that steady rhythm of connection feels louder than silence ever did. The emotionally unready often confuse consistency with intensity. Not because the love is intense, but because their emotional threshold is low. Their hearts are still learning how to expand, still adjusting to the idea that they can be loved without earning it. So instead of leaning in, they shrink back. Instead of softening, they tense up. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't know how to receive it. It's like being offered a banquet when you've been living off crumbs. It feels excessive, indulgent, even suspicious. There's a cost to survival mode. When you've been operating out of emotional scarcity, abundance can feel threatening, and consistent love is abundant. It keeps coming, even when you try to push it away. It doesn't play by the rules you're used to. It's not transactional. It doesn't punish or disappear. It just remains. And that stability can feel unnerving when you've built a life around instability. You start questioning their motives. You wonder if they'll eventually see the parts of you you've hidden, the mess, the fear, the shame, and walk away. So you beat them to it. But what you're really trying to avoid isn't the person, it's the exposure. Consistent love holds up a mirror. It shows you what you've suppressed. It triggers the parts of you that believe you're unworthy. It reveals the fears you've dressed up as independence. And instead of embracing the healing that love offers, you pull away, hoping the silence will feel safer. But even in the silence, you remember their presence, remember their patience. You remember how they never made you beg to be seen. Being emotionally unready doesn't make you broken. It makes you in process. But if you don't recognize that healing is required, you'll start to demonize the very thing that's trying to rescue you. You'll call love a burden. You'll treat care like control. You'll misinterpret devotion as desperation. Not because it's true, but because you haven't yet learned how to trust what's consistent. You haven't yet accepted that healthy love is persistent, not because it wants to smother you, but because it sees value in you that you've forgotten how to recognize. And maybe that's the hardest part. Knowing someone saw you fully and stayed. Knowing they kept showing up when you kept disappearing. Knowing they weren't scared by your silence or your distance or your confusion. They just kept loving. They kept reaching. They kept inviting you into something deeper. And now, after the echoes of their presence have faded, you realize that what once felt overwhelming was actually the beginning of healing. You just weren't ready to feel it yet. What's rejected in fear is often longed for in healing. In the moment, it's easy to push something away and believe it was never meant for you. Fear makes you question intentions, distort reality, and view genuine care through a lens of suspicion. When someone offers real connection and you've spent years bracing for abandonment, it doesn't feel like safety. It feels like a setup. So instead of embracing it, you reject it. Not because your heart doesn't recognize the value, but because your wounds have taught you to see value as danger. Fear is clever. It dresses up as logic. It tells you they're coming on too strong. It convinces you they're needy. It whispers that they want too much too soon. But beneath all that noise is a quiet truth. Their love hit a place in you hadn't yet explored. It stirred up old memories, buried insecurities, and dormant fears. It made you confront what you'd avoided. Your capacity to be seen, to be vulnerable, to be held. And when you weren't ready for that level of intimacy, you did what fear told you to do. Shut the door. It's only later, sometimes much later, that healing begins to open your eyes. After time has passed, after silence has settled in, after you've done the work to look inward instead of pointing outward, you begin to realize that what you labeled too much was actually what your soul had been craving. You understand that the discomfort you felt wasn't about them being wrong for you. It was about them being right, but too soon for the version of you that hadn't yet healed. Healing has a strange way of clarifying the past. The things you once ran from start to make sense. You begin to crave the very energy you rejected, the patience, the presence, the pursuit. Because healing softens the heart. It clears the fog. It makes you hunger for depth. And in that new clarity, you don't just remember what you had. You feel it differently. You feel the steadiness of their love, not as a threat, but as a gift. You remember the way they stayed, not as overwhelming, but as sacred. This shift doesn't come from regret. It comes from growth. You realize that you didn't reject them because they were unworthy. You rejected them because your own sense of worth was fractured. You couldn't accept what you didn't believe you deserved. And now, having done the work, having sat in the silence, cried the tears, faced the parts of yourself you used to avoid, you long for what you once denied. Not to go back, but to experience it again as the person you've become. The healed you, the whole you. There's a difference between something not being right for you and something arriving before you're ready. The former is a matter of misalignment, the latter is a matter of timing. And what most people mistake as incompatibility is actually a misfire in emotional readiness. They were the right kind of love, stable, open, nurturing, but it came to a version of you that was still surviving, still building walls, still unsure whether it was safe to be loved like that. So now, in your healing, you don't chase it, but you do acknowledge the absence. You sit with the longing, not as punishment, but as proof. Proof that you've grown, proof that you now recognize the beauty of what once felt frightening. Proof that what fear made you reject, healing now teaches you to appreciate. Emotional availability is not a weakness, it's a strength. In a world that often rewards detachment, stoicism, and surface-level interaction, being emotionally present can feel like rebellion. But it is the kind of rebellion that heals, the kind that restores, the kind that reclaims what was lost in the cycles of shutting down and pushing people away. Being available emotionally means you've done the hard work to face your feelings, not flee from them. It means you're willing to show up in truth, not just inconvenience. And that level of vulnerability requires more courage than silence ever did. There's a false narrative that showing emotions as being too sensitive or too much or too unstable. But in reality, emotional availability is the ability to hold space for yourself, for others, for the moments that can't be fixed with logic or distraction. It's having the bravery to say, this is what I feel, even when your voice trembles. It's being honest when it's uncomfortable. It's staying present when your past tells you to disappear. That kind of strength can't be manufactured. It's cultivated through inner work, through self-reflection, through confronting the parts of you that once said, don't let anyone in. People who are emotionally available are not weak. They are rooted. They've learned to trust their own hearts, not hide from them. They ask the hard questions. They check in instead of checking out. They fight fair, not with silence or avoidance, but with words and patience and intention. They seek understanding, not escape. And yes, sometimes they cry. Sometimes they feel deeply, sometimes they speak from a place of raw honesty that makes others uncomfortable, but that's because they've chosen connection over control. It takes strength to feel. It takes strength to stay open after being hurt. It takes strength to keep offering love when you don't know if it will be returned. Emotional availability is strength because it doesn't just happen. It's a decision. A daily one. And the people who choose it are not reckless with their hearts. They are responsible with their healing. They've chosen not to let fear harden them. They've chosen to be the safe space they once needed. And they're not ashamed of it. The world teaches people to numb, to get over it, to move on, to ghost, to block, to cut off. But it takes more strength to stay and have the conversation, to explain your triggers, to admit when you're scared, to ask for reassurance without shame. Emotionally available people don't just react. They reflect. They notice the shift in energy. They lean in when others back away. They know how to sit in discomfort without abandoning the relationship or themselves. Being emotionally available doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you always have the right words. It doesn't mean you never feel overwhelmed. It means you're willing to be seen, willing to grow, willing to connect without hiding behind indifference or ego. That willingness is what transforms relationships. It turns shallow waters into deep wells. It creates intimacy that can't be imitated by temporary passion or surface level attraction. It creates roots. And those who reject emotional availability are often the ones still wrestling with their own capacity to feel. They may mock it, distance themselves from it, even resent it, not because it's weak, but because it confronts the parts of them they've tried to ignore. Emotional availability is a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look. But the strength it takes to remain soft in a world that rewards hardness, that's real, that's power, that's present. Missing someone can be a sign of personal growth, not regret. It doesn't always mean you want them back. It doesn't always mean you made the wrong choice. Sometimes missing someone is your soul recognizing a chapter that mattered. It's your heart stretching to hold the weight of what once was, not because you want to relive it, but because you finally evolved enough to feel it clearly. When we're in survival mode, we don't always process experiences as they unfold. We defend, we detach, we suppress, but growth creates space for reflection. And in that reflection, memory takes on new meaning. So to begin to realize that what you pushed away wasn't just a person, it was an experience that had something to teach you. And now, as your awareness expands, so does your ability to feel the truth of what you lived through. The ache you feel in their absence doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're healing. It means your capacity to feel has deepened. It means you're finally able to sit with emotions that once overwhelmed you. Missing someone is part of that emotional expansion. It's not always a call to return. Sometimes it's just a sign that you've grown enough to care from a distance. There's a maturity in being able to honor what was without needing to reclaim it. To hold gratitude and grief in the same breath. To miss someone not because they're your future, but because they were a significant part of your becoming. It's the difference between nostalgia and desperation. Growth doesn't erase connection, it reframes it. It allows you to see the humanity in both of you, to understand your role, their role, and the space where pain and love once coexist. That's not regression, that's emotional intelligence. And yes, sometimes missing someone is the moment you realize what you weren't ready to feel before. It's the moment clarity settles in and you finally see the fullness of what they brought into your life. When you were caught in patterns of avoidance that clarity couldn't break through, you labeled it as suffocating. You told yourself they were too emotional, too present, too persistent. But now with space and growth, you see those qualities not as flaws, but as love showing up consistently. And you miss it, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. Understanding doesn't always need to lead to reconciliation. Sometimes it just leads to peace. Peace with the way things unfolded, peace with the parts of you that needed time, peace with the lessons that took distance to be fully understood. Missing someone can be the final step in your healing, not the beginning of your unraveling. It's your heart's way of saying, I'm finally safe enough to remember. This kind of missing is sacred. It's not obsessive. It's not tormenting. It's tender. It's honest. It has edges, but it also has grace. It's the ache that tells you you're no longer numb. And in that ache, you find evidence that your heart has softened, that you are no longer guarded in the way you once were, that you are no longer shutting doors before anyone has a chance to knock. That's not weakness, that's growth. The growth is what transforms the way you see the past. It doesn't change the fact, but it changes the interpretation. It gives you permission to feel what you couldn't feel then. And when those feelings rise to the surface, missing someone becomes less about going back and more about honoring what helped you evolve. It's a sign that your heart, once closed for protection, is open again, not for them necessarily, but for yourself, for your future, for the love you're now ready to receive. Healing doesn't erase memory, it reframes it. There's a belief that once we heal, the past should no longer affect us, that we should forget it, bury it, move on without a trace. But real healing doesn't come to delete the story. It comes to transform the way we carry it. Healing doesn't wipe away what happened. It simply allows you to revisit the memory without falling apart. It gives you new eyes to see old wounds. It lets you walk through the same doors in your mind, but this time with peace instead of pain. Because healing isn't about rewriting the past. It's about no longer needing to. And that is where freedom begins.